Hi everybody, and welcome to Readers of the Lost Art, Les Amuse-Bouches. Bite-sized pieces from the chef's imagination that don't belong on the main menu. Today we'll be looking at the work of Vincent van Gogh. Two particular works, Tree Roots and Sandy Ground is the first one we'll briefly look at from 1882, and then Tree Roots from 1890, which is more famous, and I believe it's the very last thing he painted. I don't think he fully finished it, but it was the last thing he painted very shortly before, unfortunately, he committed suicide. So I do need to warn you, most of my talks, aided by my miserable Mardy Ringo Starr sounding voice, are not the happiest of talks quite often, but I'm interested in some feedback eventually from people, because I find some of the so-called miserable art that I'll be looking at, sometimes, not always, there will be happy clappy stuff, honest, but sometimes the purportedly miserable work I look at, I'm interested if you feel the same way. I find that it vicariously, looking at miserable art makes me feel better, in the sense that I feel that the art takes away the misery. The art is, like I say, vicariously absorbing the misery. So I don't, when I look at Edvard Munch, The Scream, or things like that, or particularly Van Gogh, who, suffered from depression his whole life, I do feel gratitude that someone like him, who had to suffer so deeply, was still able to provide work so people like me, artworks that people like me could look at and actually not feel the need or feel the suffering that he had to go through. And maybe, and I just find it maybe counterintuitive, that we live in a time where especially young people are never exposed to anything that's particularly that might trigger them, or that is potentially dark and threatening psychologically. And I think that perhaps that is a reason why sometimes they lack a bit of resilience, because this type of art, I don't want to get all Nietzsche, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger type, Batman Joker type Nietzschean philosophy on life. But I do think there's value. There's a support to be found in misery, if that makes sense. But I'm sure some of you are looking up professional services and will be sending links for me to pursue. But this is the first picture, which is a charcoal study of roots and sandy ground. And you can see that it's quite spare, quite fine work in the very thin branches, the twigs, and then the deeper, darker shading towards the roots. So this was obviously a theme that when he did the tree roots towards the end of his life, that this theme was obviously with him earlier. And then this is obviously much more vivid. So this was the last painting before he sadly passed away. Now, it doesn't really cheer things up, does it, when I appear on screen? But hey-ho, this is a dark one, I did warn you. But when I saw Van Gogh's painting for the first time, it reminded me, and this is what I want to do throughout the channel, is make links between visual art and literary art as much as possible, because I think the two can mutually reinforce each other. They make up for each other's deficiencies, or what one medium can't provide, the other one can. They both, even together, I'm paraphrasing Adorno, but they're like two torn halves of a but yet they don't add up to an integral whole, which is a long-winded way of saying they almost added together visuality, great works of art, and great works of literature. They almost, if you combine them together, they approach that little bit closer to engaging fully with the nature of reality. But of course, they can't. They have to fail gloriously, because art can never capture reality fully. It's just the nature of the human condition. But in Jean-Paul Sartre's La Nausée, there's Nausea in English, Roquentin is a character who has this, the best way to describe it is this encounter with the roots of a chestnut tree while he's sitting in a park. And it sounds a bit odd. Why would, what's a chestnut tree ever done to him? But it's a brilliant way that Sartre, and I personally don't think Sartre was the world's best novelist, although he did win the Nobel Prize for Literature, if my memory is correct. But there are little vignettes in his literary work that really do flesh out some of his more difficult to understand concepts in existentialism. So his great existentialist work was L'être et le néant, Being and Nothingness, which is brilliant stuff, but difficult. You're talking about a wet towel wrapped around your head and a box of headache tablets, and immerse yourself in it at your own peril. But within his theory of existentialism, as the name implies, it deals quite directly and full on with the concept of the nature of existence, which we all take for granted, but actually the minute you begin to think about it is, surprisingly difficult to engage with conceptually. So we'll go back to the picture, the painting of the roots, and I'll read you the segment from La Nausée in which Roquentin encounters the roots of the chestnut tree. And I'd be interested in how you perceive the interaction of the image and the words together, whether they do in fact, mutually contribute to each other, or whether it's just a fanciful idea of mine that they do. So this is Roquentin. All at once the veil is torn away. I have understood. I have seen. The roots of the chestnut tree sank into the ground just beneath my bench. I couldn't remember it was a root anymore. Words had vanished, and with them the meaning of things, the way things are supposed to be, the feeble points of reference which men have traced on their surface. I was sitting, stooping over, head bowed, alone in front of this black, knotty lump, entirely raw, frightening me. Then I had this vision. It took my breath away. Never, up until these last few days, had I suspected the meaning of existence. I was like the others, like the ones walking along the seashore, wearing their spring clothes. I said, like them, the sea is green, that white speck up there is a seagull. But I didn't feel that it existed, or that the seagull was an existing seagull. Usually existence conceals itself. It is there around us, in us. It is us. You can't say two words without mentioning it, but you can never touch it. When I believed I was thinking about it, I was thinking nothing. My head was empty, or there was just one word in my head, the word being. Or else I was thinking, how can I put it? I was thinking of properties. I was telling myself that the sea belonged to the class of green objects, or that green was one of the qualities of the sea. Even when I looked at things, I was miles from dreaming that they existed. They looked like scenery to me. I picked them up in my hands. They served me as tools. I foresaw their resistance, but that all happened on the surface. If anyone had asked me what existence was, I would have answered in good faith that it was nothing, simply an empty form added to things from the outside, without changing anything in their nature. And then, all at once, there it was, clear as day. Existence had suddenly unveiled itself. It had lost the harmless look of an abstract category. It was the dough out of which things were made. This root was kneaded into existence. Or rather, the root, the park gates, the bench, the patches of grass, all that had vanished. The diversity of things, their individuality, were only an appearance, a veneer. This veneer had melted, leaving soft, monstrous lumps, in disorder, naked, with a frightful and obscene nakedness. Well, that was, like I say, life-affirming if you're like me, but it goes straight to, and it's a theme that I'll pick up in later parts of the channel. There's the notion of unconcealing, and concealment was mentioned in that passage, and that's, I'm guessing Sartre's taken that from Martin Heidegger's work, or he was influenced by him, because that is a common theme, the notion of unconcealment, which I'll explore with particular reference, I think, to Van Gogh's later on, The Peasant Boots, and Martin Heidegger has a lot to say about a series of pictures, paintings that Van Gogh made about peasant boots. But back to this picture of the roots. This is the area they think they found a postcard well after Van Gogh had died of the area in which he'd been painting. Auvers-sur-Oise, which I think is in northwest France. And that's the little country lane, which it may not be that obvious, but what they've done is they've actually shown, very cleverly mapped on, what you can see from the painting. So it's very likely that was actually the spot. So, you know, maybe that's not that particularly significant, but I just think it's interesting to see that little bit of reality that Van Gogh managed to perceive in such, as unfortunately proved, such agonizing depth. Just, you know, the knottiness, the obscene naked lumps of the tree roots. So, you know, most people don't have to suffer the degree to the degree of sensitivity, and this is the eternal bind of artists on the edge. Their mental disquiet is sadly what allows them to see to such depths. And we, you know, the lay person who luckily doesn't suffer from that, or maybe you do, you have mental health tendencies slightly akin to Van Gogh. But I do think that the spectrum upon which, in order to fully appreciate reality, we're always on the edge of non-reason. There's a deep undercurrent of unreason in our human relationship to existence. And there aren't many artists who manage to convey that like Van Gogh. So till the next time, all the best.